In this disaccharide, this carbohydrate is a reducing sugar, while this one is a non-reducing sugar. But you might wonder why. They look essentially identical. Why is this a reducing sugar and this is a non-reducing sugar? And what does that even mean? Well, this guy's a reducing sugar because it can reduce compounds. It can take a compound and reduce it. However, this is a non-reducing sugar because it can't take a compound and reduce it. But why? They look essentially chemically identical, so what's the difference? Well, let's see. How would this compound reduce another compound? Well, the first step is we take this oxygen and we protonate it. Now that it's protonated, we can go through a reaction where these lone pairs of electrons scooch down. When they scooch down, they form a double bond. And when that happens, this bond breaks and the electrons in this bond fall in the oxygen. So when we do that, we form this structure. Now when we form this structure, we have this formal charge of +1, this localized positive charge, which is unstable. That localized positive charge is unstable. However, fortunately, we can deprotonate this hydrogen. And if we deprotonate this hydrogen, now we form this stable aldehyde. And something important to realize is this aldehyde can get oxidized to a carboxylic acid. So therefore, because this aldehyde can get oxidized to a carboxylic acid, it can reduce another compound. Because we know if this aldehyde is getting oxidized to a carboxylic acid, something else must be getting reduced. So therefore, this is a reducing sugar because it can reduce compounds. It can take any generic compound, or really has to be a very specific functional group, and it can essentially reduce it, where this guy gets reduced and this guy gets oxidized to a carboxylic acid. So therefore, this is a reducing sugar. It can open up, forming the aldehyde. So therefore, we know this is a reducing sugar because we explained the mechanism how it can open up, forming an aldehyde, and once it forms the aldehyde, it can get oxidized to a carboxylic acid, and when it gets oxidized, it's reducing another compound. Hence, this is a reducing sugar. However, why is this a non-reducing sugar? Can't this go through the exact same mechanism? Well, let's see. Let's try it. Well, the first step is, again, remember, we protonate this oxygen. So we protonate this oxygen. The next step is these lone pairs of electrons scooch down, forming a double bond. And when that happens, this bond breaks and these electrons fall in this oxygen. So when we do that, we form this intermediate. But again, we have that localized positive charge, that formal charge of +1 with that localized positive charge, which we know is unstable. This isn't stable. And unfortunately, we're stuck. We're stuck with this positive charge. We're not able to form the aldehyde. We can't simply just get rid of this entire group to form the aldehyde. Because remember, with this carbohydrate, we were able to. Remember that same mechanism. This guy gets protonated and these electrons scooch down, breaking this bond, and these electrons fall on that guy. So again, we explained the mechanism. But when we do that, we have this localized positive charge. But fortunately, we can deprotonate this hydrogen. We can simply get rid of this hydrogen, forming the aldehyde, to get oxidized in the first place and reduce another compound. However, once we form this intermediate, we're stuck. We can't simply get rid of this group, so we can't form the aldehyde in the first place to get oxidized. So if we can't form the aldehyde to get oxidized, therefore we won't be able to reduce a compound. So therefore, this is a non-reducing sugar because it can't get oxidized in the first place, so therefore can reduce compounds. So that's the difference. That's why this is a reducing sugar and this is a non-reducing sugar. But when you see a carbohydrate, there's a very easy and quick way you can determine whether it's reducing sugar or non-reducing sugar. What you do is you look at the anomeric carbon. For example, you look at the anomeric carbon, and you see, is it an acetal or hemiacetal? So we see this anomeric carbon is a hemiacetal. It's a hemiacetal. So whenever the anomeric carbon is a hemiacetal, it's reducing sugar. However, if the anomeric carbon is an acetal, then it's a non-reducing sugar. And that's a very easy way you can determine whether a carbohydrate is a reducing sugar or non-reducing sugar. So whenever the anomeric carbon is an acetal, you can try the mechanism to form the aldehyde, and you'll see you won't be able to form the aldehyde to get oxidized in the first place, so therefore it's not a reducing sugar. So doing some examples. So what about this guy? Are these reducing sugars? Well, again, remember, you need to look at the anomeric carbons. Look at the anomeric carbons, and we see both of these anomeric carbons are acetals. So because they both have acetals for their anomeric carbons, we see they're non-reducing sugars. These are both non-reducing sugars. They can't form the aldehyde in the first place to get oxidized, so therefore they can't reduce other compounds, and therefore they're non-reducing. However, what about these carbohydrates? Well, again, you look at the anomeric carbons. This anomeric carbon is an acetal, so therefore it's a non-reducing sugar. However, this anomeric carbon is a hemiacetal, so therefore it can form the aldehyde, so therefore it can get oxidized in the first place, so it can reduce compounds, so therefore it's a reducing sugar. So again, the point is, carbohydrates can either be reducing sugar or non-reducing sugars.